Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. In today's pod, we turn our attention again to Europe's largest energy market. Germany has seen phenomenal growth in renewables capacity, and in 2023, green electricity met more than half of the country's power demand. However, Germany also became a net energy importer for the first time in 17 years. What's the outlook for 2024? In addition, what has the increasing reliance on intermittent solar and wind power meant for costs in balancing the country's grid? And when can we expect to see Germany sign off on its power plant strategy? Helping me, Richard Sverrisson, to discuss this and much more is Fabian Huneke of Agora Energiewend, a Berlin-based think tank. A warm welcome to you, Fabian.
Thank you very much, Richard, for having me.
I hope I haven't totally mispronounced your surname.
No, not totally.
Just a little. Okay, excellent, Fabian. I'd like to start off by talking about the carbon emissions in Germany in 2023. Now, they fell quite dramatically, is that right?
Yes, it has been a huge drop. It has been 73 megatons less than last year. So this is 10% year on year. And this is really huge. And it's the lowest emissions we had since the 1950s.
Excellent. So what's the main reason for that? What's the main cause of the drop?
Yeah, well, while 73 megatons sounds like and 10% is really good news for the climate debate, we have to look a little bit closer and we have to see that not all of these emission drops are sustaining through the next years. So there are some of these emissions, or some reasons for this emissions drop, which will be there next year and this decade. But some of them may come back, some of these emissions. So we estimate that about 15% are sustainable emission drops, but 85% are not. And the biggest reason we see for this emissions drop is a shift in import and export of power. So if we look to the import and export numbers, we see that there have been 19 terawatt hours less exports. So we used to be a very big exporter of lignite and coal power, and this has been reduced dramatically. And we also increased our imports. So the imports increased for 20 terawatt hours. So we really reduced exports, really increased imports. And for the first time for many, many years, we have been a net importer for power.
And you expect these emissions to not be permanent in the sense that they could, basically the exports of these kind of power sources could return?
So this is not really clear as it depends on the merit order in the European power plants. And it is very clear that the merit order can change when the coal price changes, when the gas price changes, and when the CO2 price changes. So let's have a scenario with low CO2 prices and high gas prices. Coal would be in favor of the merit order, and consumption could, coal production, lignite production, could boost up again. And then all we have as an emission drop this and last year could be back again.
So a lot of this is out of the hands of, or out of Germany's hands, put it that way. It's all depending on global or European commodity prices.
Yes, true. So we can't rely on this. If we really want to substitute this power, we should rely on cheaper imports than producing coal power. We should rely on producing more power out of solar, out of wind.
You feel then, do you think that the government or the authorities in Germany can't afford to be complacent here? They have to be, they have to meet this structural challenge of decarbonization, right?
Yeah, that's totally right. So we cannot just only rely on a phase out of nuclear and a phase out of coal and of lignite without having a phase in of the same amount of electricity produced in Germany out of solar and wind. Because if we don't do so, the increasing demand for electricity out of from coming from electric vehicles, from heat pumps, from electrolyzers can't be met. So if we don't want to be a net importer for the next decades, we need to rise our expansion of solar and especially of wind. the solar expansion has been quite big last year. So we had an addition of 40.4 gigawatt of photovoltaic. So this was quite good, but we still have only a small addition of wind onshore facilities.
If you look at the numbers here, and you, as I said in the introduction, that more than half of Germany's power demand was met by renewable electricity. I mean, that's quite a phenomenal number.
It is really big news, and I think also it's great news. But if we look closer, let's keep in mind that the emission or this high share of renewables is also an effect of really low electricity demand, as industrial consumers were producing less goods. Also, the energy-intensive consumers, they were producing less goods, so they had a low gas demand, they had a low power demand, and it's easier to have a high share of renewables if demand is low, isn't it, Richard?
Yeah, absolutely, Fabian. So, I mean, but do you expect then, do you expect demand to return to like pre-pandemic levels in the next 2 or 3 years?
Actually, the big idea of our energy turnaround in Germany is to have electrification of heat, electrification in the transport sector. So it would be very bad news if we couldn't have more demand on the power market. So I think today it's very hard to say if the energy-intensive industry in Germany will be fully back in some years. So we have seen a really large drop, and in parts, the industrial production of aluminium and so on, metals, chemical production, they might come back not in full extent, maybe as well to the full extent. That's hard to predict from today.
In a sense, some people would say that it was a mistake, or maybe Germany was a little bit hasty in the coal or the nuclear exit and then the coal exit. Would you agree with that?
I think Germany was not hasty enough with the expansion of renewables. So we have not used the time we had during the phase outs of nuclear and now during the phase out of coal and lignite. And this is, I think, the main reason why we had an import balance shifting more to imports now. And maybe one more word to the difficult German question of the nuclear phase out. How to put it? Let's say it's for German energy policy, it's a value itself to keep to the plan which has been there. So everybody who invested into a power plant the last years knew that there would be the nuclear phase out. And if you put your investments into the market relying on energy policy, and then the phase out plans are changed and changed and changed again and over again, this also is not really a good and reliable policy, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, uncertainty is a big problem here, and certainly retrospective moves to change the regulatory environment are not helpful in any way. But this brings me on to my next question, and I know we discussed it a little bit before we went on air, Fabian, but, in order to keep the lights on, many people have said that the country needs to install, 20, 25 gigawatts of gas-fired or hydrogen-ready capacity. Plans are expected soon. It's called the power plant strategy, if I'm not wrong. I mean, we're discussing now on Tuesday, the 23rd of January. So soon the strategy could be made public. But what do you expect to see here?
Well, there are, I think, let's break it down to 3 different mechanisms how we could invest into steerable power plant capacity. One is the power plant strategy, but let's keep that to the end and just mention the other 2. So there's combined heat and power plants, which are financed through a special law in Germany, and some of the capacity might come from investments in this sector, combined heat and power, substituting some coal power plants which are producing heat as well, and so on. Then we're also, at the moment, we had this platform klimaneutrales Stromsystem, so platform climate neutral power system, where we discussed a lot on the topic of capacity markets. So there is the second mechanism, how to finance the steerable power plant capacity. And then the third one is this power plant strategy. The power plant strategy is kind of a shortcut for the German government not to go through this whole discussion of a capacity market, and to have an auction for capacity a little bit sooner than later, and also having it before the next election. This I think was maybe the idea of this power plant strategy, and there has been an understanding that the European Union and at least the Commission and the German government, they said in summer 2023, okay, we now found a common understanding how we can do this power plant strategy, how we can form the auction, and to what share we need which kind of power plants. And then there was a big problem in November when the court said that we can't just spend so much money anymore. And this kind of very expensive power plant strategy, so the number of 60 billion euros was there in the room, kind of had bad times during the winter, I'd say. And actually, they wanted to have the power plant strategy ready in December, and now we're still waiting for it. And some in the Berlin political sphere say the power plant strategy is dead already. Some others said it's to be expected to be there right in some days. So we hear a lot of things, but nothing from the ministry. So we are checking our mails every second. Yeah.
Absolutely, and probably a good thing to follow Montel News as well, because we're on top of these developments. I'd also maybe like to point any listeners to an episode we covered at the start of January when we looked into detail about the Constitutional Court decision and this 60 billion euro black hole in the finances of the power plant strategy. But there is a lot of talk about ways of keeping the lights on. Do you think the best way is to build, or Germany has to build this amount of capacity to back up the renewables and the energy transition in Germany?
It is very clear that there is a certain amount of capacity which has to be built, but the certain amount is not so clear how high it is. You said something about a little bit more than 20 gigawatt. I think like the studies I know, there are somehow between 18 gigawatt at the least and about 35 gigawatt at the maximum.
Wow, okay.
So there are a lot of numbers, and I really can understand from the perspective of a modeler why their numbers differ so much from each other. I think it's because if at the same time a lot of electric vehicles and heat pumps want to consume electricity, maybe in the winter, you will need a lot of backup capacity. If you, on the other hand, as a modeler of the energy system in 6 or 10 years, assume that they are consuming power very flexible, you won't need that much capacity. But you will need a lot of fresh capacity in the market. And so this is very clear, but it's not really clear how much it will be. And maybe this discussion is also a good argument for us not to let the ministry or the regulation decide what is the right capacity, because it's not clear yet. So maybe the market is has the better feeling for the right capacity. So this could be a good argument to let the market decide whether the right share of power plant capacity and flexible consumption and at the level of the electric vehicles and heat pumps, what is the right share?
I think we discussed this in last week's episode more, the role of flexibility, which is absolutely crucial here. But just a final question on the power plant strategy, Fabian. I mean, is a lot of it here to do with, for example, is the delay in publishing it, as you've mentioned, is it to do with the European Union concerned about the market design in Germany and maybe going against or breaching state aid regulations? I mean, has Habeck, the economy minister, has he sort of boxed himself into a corner?
Well, Richard, I don't know, but I can tell you my personal view on this,
sure.
Which is more or less if you want to have fresh capacity in the market, but you don't want to spend years of discussing a capacity market, and then you decide for a shortcut and you do a decarbonization instrument saying, I want capacity, I want to auction capacity for renewable electricity, you will need green electricity, which is not coming from natural gas. So the basic idea of the power plant strategy is to have not any kind of capacity, but to have green electricity. So the power plant strategy needs green hydrogen in the merit order in front of natural gas power plants. And this is the expensive thing about the power plant strategy. And now I think this is like a discussion which could have been okayish for the state and for Mr. Lindner in summer. But now, after the court's decision in November, there's not enough money to have a very, very expensive but quick instrument. And this is, I think, the hustle we're having now at the moment.
Could you just explain to the listeners, rather, who Mr. Lindner is? Those not so familiar with the intricacies of German politics, Fabian?
Yeah, of course. So Mr. Lindner is allowed to look over what money is spent in Germany on what.
Exactly. He's the finance minister. He's in charge of the purse strings, as you were. Now, let's move on to some of the issues related to this huge growth in renewables in Germany and the challenges in balancing the grid or managing the networks here. You researched into the concept of redispatch, and could you explain that and why that's important for the electricity grid?
What's the nice thing about renewable electricity from wind and photovoltaic is that it comes for zero short-run marginal cost. So they can produce power for zero cost once they are built. And if it's windy and if it's sunny, they do this a lot, and they do it at the same time. So there's a lot of green electricity in the grid, and the grid can't have this big feed-in all the time at all regions. So sometimes the grid operators have to say, sorry, we have a problem. There's too much electricity in this grid element. We need to constrain. We need to ramp down your production, your feed-in. And because someone else wanted to consume this power and bought this power over the exchanges, at another point in the grid, another power plant has to ramp up. And this management is called redispatch. And at the moment, this is done by the TSOs. The big question at the moment is, are the TSOs the right institution to manage this, or should we break up the price zones and let the market decide where power should be produced and where it should be consumed, which power plants are ramped up and ramped down? And I think like the last years, the discussion on redispatch was like increased in velocity because the redispatch cost and redispatch numbers were growing and increasing. So this discussion has become very vital these days. And I think one number is very, very, very interesting when looking to 2023. We had 22% of the wind offshore generation, which has been curtailed, has been redispatched in the first half of 2023. So it's 1 out of 5 kilowatt hours of wind offshore power, which could have been produced but hasn't been fed into the grid, in braces, and we had to pay for it. So this is quite a big number. So, but let me add, 2023 is maybe a bad example because in the first quarter of 2023 we had the low nuclear output in France, and we had a lot of redispatch in southern Germany. So maybe this is like a very enormous number which won't be there in the second half of 2023. But still, it's not a problem of the future; it's a problem of today.
What do you mean by that? I mean, do you expect those numbers to come down?
The only thing which can reduce this number is the grid expansion. But there's another measure which could be undertaken, which is organizing this redispatch process, which could be reformation of the price zones in Germany. So one thing is really healing this problem with grid expansion, and the other one is who's responsible for telling who should be redispatched, which power plant, which generation source should be redispatched. Is it a power plant in the European surrounding countries from Germany? Is it an offshore power plant? Is it a coal power plant? So who should be in charge for giving the redispatch signal? Is it the TSOs? Should they do the redispatch, or should we have a market where the market price decides which power plant is feasible to run and which is not?
I'm tempted to say I think you side with the latter here, Fabian.
Actually not. I'm in a process of understanding. I think there are two positions, and if you ask in the market, you will find all those with more scientific view on the market and more the European look to the market will go for nodal or zonal prices. And if you ask stakeholders who have been in the market for some years in the German market, and not so much from the scientific, but from the real economy, they will say one single price zone has really good effects. And we should keep to one big price zone. I think if we break it down to only two arguments, the two most important arguments, I think the fans of nodal and zonal price say, hey, we need a good, efficient redispatch in the future, and the renewable electricity and the consumption of electric vehicles and heat pumps will be decentral, so we need decentral markets. But then the other ones come and say, okay, but what we need as well is a liquid market, a liquid power market. We want to trade our risk at the forwards market, so we need some liquidity. And all these small markets, they won't be able to have all this liquidity. And these two positions, that they both are valid. And at the moment, I can't decide which one to follow.
It's a very, very complex, and also obviously having one German power zone is politically a strong argument as well.
Yes, this is, I think, because the southern Germany industry is fearing to pay more for electricity than the northern one. Although if you look closer, you have to admit that through the grid fees, we are already having a very decentralized structure of power prices, because the grid fees are differing from north to south very much. And in the northern part of Germany, you are having higher grid fees than the southern part. So only looking to the gross market and to the power exchange might be a little bit too undercomplex. Maybe I find one there has been one occasion at the beginning of January, at 15th of January, which was quite interesting. Maybe let me explain this one, because it perfectly fits to what you asked me, Richard. So
sure,
it has been
Fabian.
Quite windy on 15th of January, so prices were quite low. But the wind was produced in northern Germany, so they had to redispatch a lot. They had to ramp down some wind power plants in northern Germany, and to ramp up some gas and coal power plants in southern Germany and surrounding countries. This let the TSO in southern Germany, in Baden-Württemberg, Transnet BW, let them to tell the people consuming power in southern Germany, which is called Stromgedacht. It's an app where you can see like messages from the TSO, and they say, if you want to help to stabilize the grid, please consume less power. So we have two signals here. One is the market signal. It says consume more power. It's windy. The price is pretty low at the exchange. And then we have a TSO saying, please consume less power here in southern Germany because it's quite expensive to have redispatch at the moment. And if you want to have lower grid fees, you can help us by reducing consumption. And I mean, okay, this is one occasion, and this has been there last year as well, 1 or 2 times. But maybe this will be more frequently in the next years if we exceed if we expand our wind portfolio.
Absolutely. So obviously, it's the consumer in the end who pays for these very costly redispatch and this curtailment of wind power. So what's the answer? If we can round up by talking maybe what could be the answer here, Fabian.
Richard, it's hard to tell you the answer because I think we haven't found the stone of wisdom yet in these regards. But there are 2 approaches to this. One is have more intelligent grid fees. So look to the grid fee structure in Germany and give it a good structure concerning how high are the grid fees at what time, and how high are the grid fees where in the grid. The other one is change the bidding zones. This could be an answer to a higher dispatch strategy, but until now we haven't found a cure for the problem of a liquid future market and forward market. So it's too early for us to say this is our Agora advice. For the grid fees, this is quite obvious that we need intelligent grid fees, which change through the time and change to the node. And we could concentrate on having good grid fees at the moment and have a good debate on the power market design, on the zonal and nodal split. We are trying to help this discussion by doing a nodal Agora meta. I don't know if you saw this. We have a tool, a dashboard, where we visualize the market, and we're planning to expand this to have a view on what would be a nodal price if we had one, and what would be the renewable energy share if we had a nodal system. So it may be going to launch this somehow first half of this year, I think. And then let's have a good discussion about the pros and cons and decide for or against a single price zone.
Absolutely. Well, a lot of interesting work ahead there, Fabian, I think. So thank you for joining the Montel Weekly Podcast.
Thank you, Richard.